For about 2 months now, I've been learning and mastering a very popular mod called Axiom. If you haven't heard of Axiom, you came to the right place because today my goal is to show you everything this mod can do. Because as a builder, I wish I was using this mod years ago. You can say goodbye to world edit and all that because Axiom replaces all those other mods. And this is just my opinion, but I do think it does a better job than all those older mods. Anyway, let me show you what this mod can do. First of all, let's cover what all of this is. On the left here, we have a bunch of simple but very useful options that you can toggle on or off. For example, my favorite is replace mode. What this does is instead of having to break a block to place a new one, you can now just right click with your block and it automatically replaces it. A lot of builds I make start out as a wool shape, so this helps me change out the wool for the blocks I actually want to use. Another useful one that helps me out a lot is the angel place option, which basically lets you place blocks in midair. If you're trying to build floating islands or builds in the sky, it's very useful. And it might even surprise you how often you use this. There's a bunch more like no clip that lets you go through any solid block. There's also fast place, which, well, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The tinker one I found helps out a lot. It's basically a debug stick, but instead of a stick, you just have to right click. If you don't know what a debug stick is, it's basically just a stick that lets you change all the block states in the game. Also, if you're wondering why you can't find this in your game, it's because you need a command to get the stick, but that's pretty much it for the left side of this menu. There's obviously more options, but those are more basic stuff. Now, you probably noticed this slider on the right. It might just be my opinion, but this is one of my favorite features of Axiom, and all it is a speed slider. The higher you slide it, the faster you'll go, and the lower you go, well, it's obvious, but you're going to go slower. Keep in mind this only applies when you're flying, and also I think it's pretty obvious, but this mod is for creative only. I didn't mention that yet, so I thought I'd just make it clear. Anyway, I don't know what it is, but this slider is one of my favorite features I use the most in this mod. Especially on bigger builds, it makes it a lot easier to get from one point to another. These two options up here we're going to ignore because I have no idea what they do, to be honest, and it looks way too complicated for me. You can probably guess what these do. They just let you change game modes more easily. And now to the part where you're probably wondering, why does this guy have so many hotbars? Well, that's because with Axiom, you can have more than one hotbar. If you ever use the saved hotbar option, it's basically the same thing, but a lot more simple to use. So let's say you have a block palette you really like. You can save it by putting all the blocks in your hotbar and then opening the menu and just scroll down. Now you have a fresh hotbar to work with, and whenever you want to go back to those other blocks, just open the menu and scroll back up. I'm used to just middle clicking to get every block, or as other people call it, block picking. So I haven't found this extremely useful, but if you're building a city, for example, it could be useful to have a hotbar for the road, one for the houses, and you get the point. And that's pretty much it for this menu. As you can tell, once you understand everything, it's pretty simple. And if you build a lot, it's extremely useful. Also, you probably noticed the arrows on the right of my hotbar, and that's the next option we're going to take a look at. If I scroll, you can see that most of these are pretty self-explanatory. You have move, which lets you move things around. There's clone, which lets you clone things. You can also click R to rotate your selection, whether you're moving or copying something, which is pretty useful. There's smear and stack, which pretty much do the exact same thing. You just select a point and you can bring it out and move it around. Extrude lets you select a big chunk of a single block type, and then you can expand and shrink it. Erase is pretty obvious. You just make a selection and then you can delete it. Also, keep in mind that you can undo with this mod. I think the default keybind is Ctrl Z, so if you did something you didn't mean to do, just press Ctrl Z and it should undo it. Finally, set up symmetry. This one's a little more complicated, but basically you can place a point where you want everything to be copied around it, and then you only have to build on one side and it'll all be copied on all four sides. This is really useful if you're building something like a tower, which is usually pretty symmetrical. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, consider leaving a like, and while you're down there, maybe even subscribe. I appreciate all the support, so thank you, and now let's get back to the video. So far, I think everything is pretty simple. I don't think it's too complicated, but now let's check out this slightly more complicated menu. I know it's a little overwhelming, but let's break it up into small parts. Also, I haven't used everything in this menu yet, so let me just show you what I think is the most useful. Starting with magic select. With this, you can right click on any type of block, and it'll make a selection of every block of that kind that are either next to each other or close. What you can do afterwards is go to the right and select whatever block you want. I think by default this is stone, but then just drag and drop the block you chose onto your selection, and you just replaced every single one of those blocks. I think it's clear how this can be useful, but if you're having trouble making a selection, or you want to select 2 blocks or more instead of just one specific block, you can just right click more than once with the magic select, and it'll select whatever you click. Moving on though to the box select, which is pretty much the same thing as magic select, but this time you have to make a box yourself. The freehand select is a little more weird in my opinion, but it's just another way to make a selection, and the same goes for this one here. Finally, to something a little more interesting is the ruler. There's nothing complicated about this, but I do use it quite a bit because I think we've all been there counting every single block, and it's not great. So this helps a lot with that. Most of the next ones are all brushes, and they basically all allow you to paint blocks in a different way. But my favorite brush, I think, is the gradient brush. It's more or less what it sounds like. You can choose however many blocks and which blocks you want to use, and then you can paint a gradient using those blocks onto whatever you want. Personally, I prefer making my gradients by hand, but this is a good start if you don't mind touching it up a little bit. Moving on to this thing. The rock tool has to be one of my favorite tools in Axiom, as well as the shape tool, because they both make terraforming so much easier and more fun. First, we can start with a simple shape. You have a bunch of options here, like making your shape flat or solid. You can also choose out of a ton of different shapes to make. And then in my opinion, the most important or useful option, you can get separated X, Y, and Z dimensions if you click this box. But with this, you can make some really cool shapes or rock looking things. Then when you have a base, you can use the rock tool to build some more rocks off of the other ones. The elevation, smooth, and slope tools are also great for making terrain. The smooth, well, does exactly that. It just smooths out the shape. And then the elevation brings the terrain up or down, as well as the slope tool, which kind of does the same thing, but it's just a little bit different to use. In my opinion, if you want to make custom terrain, these are the best tools to use because they have so many customization options. And in general, combined, you can make some really cool stuff. Now for the rest of the tools, I haven't really tried them out except for the path tool. The path tool is awesome in my opinion. It does exactly what it's meant to do, which is make paths, obviously, but you can basically just make different points on the ground. I would recommend changing the shape to flat because your road might look a little weird otherwise, and then you can adjust the radius depending on how wide you want your path to be. There's not much more to it, but it's so nice to have a tool like this whenever you need to make a road or a path somewhere. By the way, the block you choose on the right is usually the block that the tool will use as well, but if it uses another block, you can always make a selection and change it. That's pretty much it. Now I think at this point you understand how this mod works, but there's still a couple things you can do with this mod that I think are worth mentioning. First of all is the color field. You might have seen some color wheels and stuff like that, where every block is in the right place for whatever color it is on a color wheel, but Axiom actually has an option to generate one of these color wheels or color fields, whatever you want to call it. All you have to do is make a selection in the air, then go to operations and click generate color field. This is going to pop up, and over the last couple of weeks I've gotten every single one of my gradients from this. You can easily pick 2 blocks and find good transition blocks to go in your gradient, which is awesome in my opinion. Another cool option in the operations tab is the auto shade. This allows you to pick a point where you want to simulate the sun, then click auto shade, and Axiom takes your position to make artificial shadows on your selection. As always, these kinds of things always need a couple touch-ups, but it's still a great way to save some time. So hopefully the way I explained this mod was good enough. I think you can see now how useful this mod can be if you build a lot, but just to show you, I decided to throw something together really quick using a bunch of the tools in Axiom. I know this mod has been out for a while now, and I'm not the first to say this, but this mod is such a game changer when it comes to building. Everything is just easier and faster to build, and the best part about it, at least in my opinion, is I'm not just sitting there typing commands like some other mods. I like that with Axiom you can actually see in real time what's going on, and honestly I'm still amazed at how good this mod is. Obviously all the credit goes to Moulberry, the creator of this mod. I'll have links to all of his stuff in the description, so go check that out. As you can see, I built this entire thing and it took me just under an hour, which is kind of crazy to me. So if you like building in Minecraft, I 100% recommend you check out this mod. Thank you for watching. Again, if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like. I post a bunch of building related videos all the time, so if you're into that, consider subscribing, and with that, have a great rest of your day.